Hi, loves. Welcome to AW Confidential. Today, I am joined by Danny Miro-Chinea, founder of Comprende and partnerships manager at Famosos. He and I are going to be talking about something that is very dear to my heart as a creator, but we're going to talk about ownership, community, and what intentional growth really looks like. Hi, Danny.
Hello, hello. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. As a creator, as a founder, as a business person, and an entrepreneur, I think there are conversations that we're just not having enough of. So I
Mm.
wanted to have you on to sort of bring some color, and not just for me, but there's a lot of creators out there. I can't remember the exact number because it keeps changing, but the creator economy is no longer a side hustle. It's not a gig.
Mhm,
It's just become a beast, right? You
mhm,
have
mm.
on one side you have the content creators, on the other side you have I don't know how many podcasts are being created like every week. I just heard about Bad Bunny's signing on to do some partnership with iHeart. So it is
Wow.
just becoming this huge beast. Now, for you, before we get to the good stuff, because I'm very curious, you started your career as a legal assistant
That's right.
in DC. So that is like such a huge shift long before Comprende and Famoso. So I want to give our community a little bit of color on that. First of all, what did that chapter, because it's such a different industry, but what did that
Mm,
chapter teach you about stability, success, and the path that you're supposed to follow? And I like to talk about that because I know I grew up with this blueprint, right?
mm.
Latina, Dominican, you go to school, go to college, get a job, 401k, vacation, if you're lucky once a year, benefits. It's a blueprint that I think a lot of us Latinos have. But you took a detour after doing all that. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So it's an interesting journey to kind of where I am today, and kind of like you mentioned, and similar to many Latinos and Latinas that grew up, in the States or between the States and kind of their home country, or in my case, I don't know, Puerto Rico. I thought I had, two different angles, either lawyer, engineer, or doctor. And I, eventually chose the sort of lawyer route, and that's the route that I thought I wanted to take. That throughout college, I did different internships in the legal space. But I knew I wanted to kind of get a little bit of work experience before fully committing, to law school. I knew it was a big time and also money investment. And while I, was very blessed to, receive almost full scholarships for college, I knew that for law school, it's not really the same thing. It's a working a bit, saving a bit, but also making connections, what would be helpful. So started my career in DC. I was fortunate to be at a top three corporate law firm. On paper, it was like I would go there, then I would go to a top, 10 law school and kind of come back, make more money than anybody in my family, most likely had ever made. And that was the journey I thought I was on, right? But I took that job mainly for the experience and because ultimately down the line, I wanted to do something trying to help Puerto Rico's legal status and how we are. So it was this big grand mission of that long-term goal of why I wanted to become an attorney. But once I was in it and I saw how the system worked from within, and I even saw it, within the context of living in DC as well, I realized, you know what? I could do this. I could become a lawyer. But I don't know if this is necessarily for me. Before we kind of hop on, we were talking a little bit about how, life is short and you only live once. And I told myself, I could always go and do this. And I, in my time, met attorneys that had maybe done one career and then eventually went to law school. So I always knew that was a possibility. And I asked myself, what could I do instead? And the thing that kept coming back was always entrepreneurship. I always had, a lot of different ideas growing up, little small, mini
Did
businesses,
you
if you
have
will.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Did you have anyone in your family who had like their own business or no?
Uh, no, mostly everybody in my family, traditional careers. My mom was the first person in her family to go to college. And, really that's all kind of I had seen. Part of what inspired me was actually just that, beyond just my own family, stories in general, basically started consuming a lot of content, reading, a lot of books, listening to podcasts, right, about entrepreneurship. And so much I saw our voices missing, right? And that was almost a bit of that fire that I needed. And I said, hey, if these other people could build these big businesses, or hey, if these other people could make a positive impact through entrepreneurship, right? Not just thinking about the money piece, but really the impact we can have as an entrepreneur. I said, we need more people like that. And I think, I can use my talents in that area instead of just law. And ultimately, that's what, over time made me do the jump, and then kind of explore the world of startups, until eventually I started Comprende 2 years ago.
I want to ask you about this because I think it's important to sort of get a feel for how your perspective. What was the void that you kept seeing over and over again?
Yeah, really, it was that. It was I saw stories of Latino success being absent, and realizing, hey, maybe if I become that person, right? If I become that Latino that starts a business, maybe I can then inspire others to do the same, right? Or I can help others realize that there's other paths than the ones that we were kind of commonly prescribed to, and show that there's so many different ways of what success and what Latino and Latina success can look like.
I
At the same time,
No, I because I do want to mention you started as a content creator, didn't you?
a little bit, you could say it like that. I think I never directly saw myself as a content creator, but rather I saw content as a tool for business, right? At the beginning of the conversation, you were mentioning how there's so many different podcasts, so many different content, how the creator economy is now this big category. And from a business sense, I realized that the smartest businesses, especially kind of post pandemic, were really being social first in terms of how they presented themselves to the world, right? It wasn't necessarily, let me build a business and do content to support that. Was, let me start doing content around an area that I'm interested in to lead them right towards the business, or see what this audience wants, right? As a business kind of from me, let's say, using those kind of intersections of interest. And for me, the reason I started with content was I had this bigger idea of wanting to create a marketplace for Latino and Latina businesses. I kind of realized when I was starting on this journey that, while I saw all this data of how, Latinos are 20% of the US, or the highest creators of new business, Latinas specifically, being the highest creator of new business growth in the US. However, it was hard to find these shows. It was hard to find, let's say, these companies unless it was word of mouth or recommendation, or unfortunately only during Hispanic Heritage Month, where you would see articles like, here's 15 businesses to support this month. And I said, well, I'm not Latino or Latina just this month. I'm Latino year round. And so I wanted to start doing something around that. And so that's why I started doing content, was to start getting people, interested in this idea of supporting other Latino and Latina businesses, and having a way to kind of discover Latino businesses. So it was content first, to bring people into this ecosystem, where I had this goal of eventually building this platform for Latino businesses. And what happened was, as a result of that content, unexpectedly, but sort of expectedly because I knew it was a possibility, it led to some inbound opportunities to work on some projects with Latino founded companies who basically saw the content that I was putting out there, saw the experience that I had in startups, and saw, hey, here's this, talented young Latino, you could say, putting this information out there. It'd be interesting to work with him. And so that first opportunity really opened my eyes, and then you realize, well, I have a lot of value with this experience that I've had, as well as this personal interest for my community. Maybe I can actually start combining this a bit more. To my surprise, it led to even more opportunities kind of coming to me in terms of the work I was interested in doing. And in less than a year, was sort of making more than my full-time job at the time, and told myself, you know what? This wasn't at all the kind of intention or end goal of the business, let's say, or this marketplace that I wanted to create. But I told myself this could be the launching pad to eventually get there, or, to some potentially new exciting path, which is kind of what it's led to today, and the work I get to do today.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing because we need it now more than ever. We contribute, Latinos contribute, is it 2 trillion or 3 trillion? I mean,
4.1 trillion, the
and
latest data.
we need our stories out there, and we should be telling our stories as Latinos, right? Now, did you get any pushback or sort of not negativity, but any pushback as far as there's not an audience for this. We don't need those stories. We can have someone else tell those stories. Like, what kind of challenges do you have to confront to get this off the ground?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say I received any direct pushback from people. People maybe had their own thoughts, or maybe the pushback was more so, let's say, from my family, was like,
Opinions.
is this actually gonna work, or can we sustain this? I'm somebody that likes looking at the data and the numbers, right? Um, whole reason I was able to start the jump and I decided to start focusing on Latino and Latina businesses was because of the numbers. Again, those figures that I started sharing earlier in terms of the size of the population, how much businesses we are creating. That right there told me there's an audience, right? And that's the beauty of the creator economy and the internet, quite frankly, that you might think I'm the only person who's interested in stories, and it's actually like that's not so true, right? It's a really big world out there, and the internet is what allows us to connect, right, in so many different ways. And so, maybe at the time I was down in Miami, and obviously, yeah, Miami does have a lot of Latinos, but I was having readers from New York and California and Texas, right? And at the same time, because of the power, right, of working online, then eventually have clients also in other places because Latinos are everywhere. And if there's one thing that I have found is that, not always, unfortunately, but in many cases, and in my opinion, the types of people that you would want to work with or have in your audience, right, are very supportive and are interested in seeing our community succeed, no matter if you're Boricua, Dominicana, Colombian, Mexican, et cetera. And so over time, I found that supportive. While I might not have, let's say, the largest audience personally, I reach people and I make an impact. And if I just change the mind, the perspective, or help another Latino see themselves in the story or give somebody an opportunity for me, I'm making an impact. And that's a big part of how I carried my work and how I was able to do this without so much pushback.
Wow. Well, you are certainly your reputation precedes you. I mean, you back it up with action. So really, I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. Now, we have spoken about this before, and money is a thing in the just across society, across cultures, particularly in this business, because the creator gig is, and I don't like to call it let's call it the creator economy because that's
Mm.
what it's become. There can be so many complicated messages that come across. I think there's a lot of misrepresentation about how much is made, who's making it. And in Latino households, one of the things that at least has been my experience, people can question money and, you know, money's evil, or, or you're not making enough of it, or you're not making it in a way that sort of follows that blueprint. There's a lot of challenges that come with money. So a lot of different beliefs, better said. What beliefs did you have to consciously unlearn as you started building for yourself? Because I think we've discussed, when I started, I had this guilt about, what do I charge? How much do I charge? Should I charge? There's all these beliefs that come with us when we take on uh, this type of work. And it can be hard because you sort of struggle with your self-worth, with guilt, with shame about money. First of all, I want to know, were there any beliefs that you had to unlearn, and how did you manage that, if there were any challenges? For me, there have been.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had to unlearn things and I had to learn things as well, right? And I think a big part was being able to firstly be uncomfortable with the uncertainty. Entrepreneurship is an uncertain journey, right? You are taking risks. However, it's also risky having a job, right? At any point, somebody could say, ciao, you're fired, right? At the same time, you can randomly use your biggest client, right? Which happened to me in my first year and had to, after had to transform my business or learn the importance, right, of getting more clients. But I think for me, more than learning or something that I heard once that I think helped me how I think about it, um, was not so much my business, but at the time was, the life that I want to live, the lifestyle, or let's say that I want to live. I heard this in a podcast somewhere or read it, and what's this idea of kind of what's your freedom number, right? And for everybody that looks a little bit different, what exactly does this mean? This involves thinking a little bit about your living situation, right? What are things that are important to you? And actually sitting down and spending some time looking at the numbers, right? I think it's really important to plan things, even though sometimes with business things come to you and you have to decide what to say yes to, what to say no. But if you spend some time thinking about that bigger number, it basically looks like, okay, what is the number that I know that if I reach this, it's going to cover, my basic expenses. I'll be able to save a little bit. Um, and I'll know that I'll be comfortable, right? And anything else beyond that is, let's say, a bonus. And so that's what I spent some time thinking, what's that number for me? And so I had a number in my mind and I told myself, I'm going to try to reach that number. As I saw opportunities come in, I started realizing based on this kind of pricing, I know I can reach that number. And once I did, actually that was steady for some time. Then I ended up, increasing what that number uh, looked like. But in terms of my everyday living, right, and how I carried myself, that didn't change. And so I knew that if I was consistent in reaching that number, I would be comfortable, my business would be okay, and I would be okay. And so, well, that's not what we're told. A lot of people are told to climb the ladder or always, uh, we do live in a very consumeristic society of wanting more, 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 right? I would like to have an approach that is a little bit more minimalistic. And I know what's important to me, right? And what I spend my time on, what I spend my money on. And so there's ways to do it. It's just recognizing what is that number for you in terms of pricing. It can be the Wild West, right? But
Yeah.
I like to think about it in terms of what's the value that you can provide as a person, as a business, right? And a lot of times that's a lot more valuable than we might think, right? Whether it's your audience, whether it's, again, how you price a particular project. But I really think it's about the value that you get. To give you two kind of concrete examples from an audience standpoint, it's not about the size of the audience, but it's the type of audience, right? An audience that is very specific on a specific industry, right, has a lot more value, even if it's smaller than a creator that reaches, let's say, a lot more people, but it's very general or maybe focused on comedy or so on and so forth. So the opportunities are going to be different. Both have an opportunity to make good money potentially, right? But the pricing is going to look different based on the value. Similarly with a service, depending how you can leverage your skills to do something for somebody, right? You can kind of price accordingly. But my best tip is always price yourself what you're worth and maybe add a little bit on there. Don't undercharge because you might be afraid of losing clients or not landing a deal. Instead, let somebody see your value, your worth. And if that's somebody that truly can see that, they're going to be willing to make that investment. And if you deliver the results that you promised you did, hopefully, that'll lead to sending that client, making more money from them, or eventually, getting more clients, getting referrals, so on and so forth.
Did you ever deal with guilt?
A bit, yeah. Am I the right person for this? Maybe not so much skilled, maybe more so imposter syndrome, right? Dealing with people more experienced than me, people older than me, people who had been in the industry, longer, people who had specifically worked in spaces that I was entering, right? However, I'm somebody who's always been a quick learner, and I believe all of us have the power to go out there and teach ourselves things. That's through the internet, AI, going to the library, right? There's all these different methods, and that's how when I first transitioned out of the legal field, right? I didn't have concrete startup experience, right? But I was able to land a job at a startup, get equity, grow with that company, learn a lot, right? And that's because I knew how to talk the world of entrepreneurship. I knew how to talk startups, and I knew that I could grind until I could learn things and, hopefully make an impact.
It's funny that you mentioned that because AI is everywhere now. Do you have any particular concerns or sort of conflicts with how AI is coming up and how I think there have been AI models, AI artists? How do you think that can potentially impact our creator economy? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, it's a
That's a whole
question
nother
for honestly
episode.
like a whole nother episode. Right? But to briefly, share my thoughts, it's definitely going to change everything. It already is. We're seeing now AI that more and more is realistic, right? It's going to lead to really good things and it's going to lead to really bad things, unfortunately. For example, in the world of, let's say, politics, we've already seen so much misinformation. AI is only going to accelerate it, right? When you can have something that for somebody even my age can sometimes seem almost unrecognizable, right? Already imagine how much better it's going to get, right? And imagine, other generations, how they are we going to see it. However, right, again, there's a good and the bad, and you have to decide as an entrepreneur how you're going to leverage it. And, my perspective is that if other folks are leveraging this technology, especially those privileged groups, right, that have had technology, have had the resources, why not us? Why not, Latinos? Why not other minorities? We should, in my opinion, be educated about AI, learn a little bit about what's going on, right? You don't have to be an expert, but being familiar with what tools will allow you to do your work a little bit faster. It's obviously going to play a massive impact in the creator economy, but I like to think about how we can use it to really elevate our businesses, right? Streamline things, do things quicker, be more effective, right? And there's so many ways that we can do. That's why part of the reason I say it could be a whole nother conversation. But I would say, don't be afraid of it. See how you can leverage it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I do need to speak a little bit about Comprende. Comprende partnered with Famosos to reach a wider audience. Congratulations on that. That's really impressive. What did scale mean to you in that moment when all this sort of unfolded? And how do you think about growth without losing the community piece? I think sometimes, when you have a smaller community, it's sort of easier to navigate, connect, engage. But then, now you have this growth. How do you make sure you don't lose anyone sort of, you know, as you grow, as you scale?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, how I saw it, was this idea that, people buy from people and there's only so much that I can do, right? And so when I first started, right, and even still, right, you could say that I almost launched into this entrepreneurial endeavor almost as a freelancer, let's say, right? I was doing this part time. It was like a side hustle. I was doing some freelance kind of work from clients. I ultimately started building a book of clients, right? And then I really realized working with one of my clients in particular, where I was helping them. It's a financial technology company called Suma Wealth, founded by Becky Acevedo, who's founder of Me Too.
Yes.
So one of the pioneers sort of in the Latino space in the US. And I learned a lot throughout that experience, and I saw what's possible, within the market, as well as kind of from a social perspective. And so as I was kind of trying to grow, and I made this connection with Andres, the founder of Famosos, I saw this opportunity to join forces with a company that has been around for much longer than me, has an incredible team, in the US and in Latam, is already working on these, even much bigger scale campaigns than what I was directly working with at with through my clients at Comprende. But I had some exposure to specifically through that one client, and so I saw, the opportunity to have this team kind of behind me and me sort of start serving as a bit of that connector. And again, that was one of the benefits of starting right with content in mind, not thinking of myself as a content creator, but just realizing that content is a tool if you want to be an entrepreneur. So there's two different ways to think about it, right? You could think like a content creator, you could think like an entrepreneur. And my hope is to help more people realize that you should think like an entrepreneur, but post and act like a creator, right? And so by doing that, I realized, okay, I can leverage everything that I've done, you'll comprende all these connections that I've built out of good faith, out of just providing value for people to then leverage it through Famosos and have these bigger opportunities where I can then bring in clients, expand the business and, make a bigger and wider impact. And thankfully it's been going really well. So that's a little bit of, how I got to that point and, why I see it as beneficial.
Wow, I could pick your brain for hours. Creators today are visible, but not always sustainable. What's one mindset shift you believe is essential for creators who want long-term ownership, not just short-term attention, which we have a lot of TikTok. Oops. What are your thoughts on that? I think
I think
ownership is that's the future for us.
Yep. I think it's a great question, and it relates to what I was just saying in terms of, thinking like an entrepreneur and acting like a creator. Too many creators, in my opinion, now being deep, in the industry, chasing that virality. Honestly, it's kind of a constant chase to stay relevant. Right? A bunch of content that is always going to be out there, and it can be tough, right? And once you start to grow, you only depend on brand partnerships. It's a great way to make a living and to make a lot of money. And I know because I see the numbers, every day that creators are making and campaigns that we're running. However, right, one, that can get tiring, right? This constant hamster wheel of just, working with a lot of brands. But also, right, if you're not consistent, that can kind of go away, but you have to be consistent. So it is really tough. But I think what helps people the most is saying, hey, what is it that I'm truly passionate about? And how can I connect this to something that can bring money, right? And I know that's a simple way to kind of think about it, right? But uh, there's a lot of opportunity. And again, going back to what I was saying in terms of what is your audience and what is the message you're sharing. Nowadays, especially the algorithms of Instagram and TikTok are very much based on interest and kind of what you're searching for or interested at the moment. And so if you're able to really speak to a particular audience or speak to somebody that's interested in that or looking for that information, it's going to reach them, and that becomes a lot more valuable, right? Because then you can help them solve a problem that they might have, right? That allows you to start a business, not just depend on, let's say, brand partnerships or platform ad revenue, right? So I wish, and I think we're starting to see a lot more of this where creators are seeing themselves as this, right? Or folks are doing kind of what I'm doing, right? You're publishing content, but your goal isn't necessarily to become a creator. It's to build a business that just happens to do content, right? For some folks, the content piece ends up blowing up and overtakes a business. For other people, the business becomes the main thing, right? But I think there's a big opportunity, again, to really start thinking like businesses and a space that we're starting to see more of. And I think we're going to see more of in years to come is creator led businesses where, audiences are becoming extremely valuable. And with AI, that real connection will become even more valuable, right? There's going to be a point where everybody can make content with AI. It's already here. You could argue, but if you really have a strong audience connection, that allows you to build business, that allows you to invest in businesses, that allows businesses to allow you to become, let's say, a partner where you are earning more direct income from ownership equity, right, in a company rather than just, again, depending on sponsorships and ad revenues. And so really think about how you can receive different revenue sources, how you can build a business as a creator, and what focus you want to be known for.
I love that. Thanks, Danny. That was really insightful. I I have to pick your brain about this. I wasn't planning on it, but
Mhm.
I have to. Metrics are and I've had this conversation before. Metrics are important. Brands, companies want an ROI, return on investment, right? But what happens with engagement? What do you think? Should there be a balance there? Should, we be focused on the numbers, on the message, on engagement, on community? Because I do believe that building community and engaging, even if you have 2,000, 3,000, that engagement to me is gold. And as a business person, I also understand that I want return on my investment. I want to be able to, to see what I'm getting for what I'm paying. So I
Mhm.
understand what is your I'm curious, what is your take on that whole, because it's sort of a tug of war. What do we
Yeah.
focus on? The numbers? I've seen creators that have, or public figures, whatever you want to call them, that have millions, but there's no engagement. I'm curious, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So I'll give you kind of two perspectives really quickly. One from the influencer marketing industry, and then just kind of my personal suggestions to maybe listeners. On the influencer marketing side, right? Engagement is actually one of the most important metrics. However, every goal for a brand when it comes to influencer marketing is going to be a little bit different, right? So as a creator, it's important to note that when brands are looking or evaluating creators, again, every campaign has different goals and purposes, so there will be different reasons. But more and more smaller creators are being leveraged, as well as, alongside larger creators. And a big reason for that is engagement. Right? Being constantly deep in the numbers, you consistently see smaller creators that have a lot stronger engagement. And that's going to be based on likes, comments, saves, etc. That shows a lot more value, in my opinion, right, to a brand because this is a much more engaged audience. It's not somebody who's just seeing the content and scrolling past, and that person just so happens to have thousands or millions, right, of followers, but rather this person has this engaged audience that cares about something deeply, right? That's where I think there's more value, and you get to that by caring more about the message and caring more about your community, right? That's the kind of key, and that's kind of the industry. My perspective is it always just goes back to what I was saying. Like, audience size doesn't matter, or metrics don't matter as much as the type of audience that you're cultivating and the type of audience that you have, and your personal goals as a creator or as an entrepreneur. As a personal tip, right? Especially if you're really looking to build a business and treat content creation like a business, is the most untapped opportunity right now is still LinkedIn. LinkedIn
Interesting.
is growing as a platform and as a social network as if it was Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, right? The difference is you know exactly who you're talking to, right? It's not, John Smith 74, like, who you have no idea who it is, who has, 2 followers in Idaho, right? And is hating on your post. You have the vice president of marketing at, X company. You have the founder of Y company. You get the point. And so I think it's a really untapped opportunity because while LinkedIn has, over 1 billion users, the stat always gets turned around. Don't know exactly, but somewhere between 2 to 3%, I think, less than that, post actively, right, on LinkedIn. But the daily users is huge, and so there's just need for content. But also it allows you to be visible in the eyes of decision makers. And so by having this kind of visibility on LinkedIn, and I think the opportunity is there, it allows you to connect with some really interesting people. It allows a lot of interesting opportunities to come to you, right? Whole reason we're on this podcast is because I met somebody on LinkedIn who became a LinkedIn friend who invited me to this event, right? Who then
Mhm.
another person that I met on LinkedIn was also at that event, and I knew she was going to be there, and you guys knew each other, right? So then we met. And so that's the power of that platform. And even at that event, for example, like, I've had 2 people who started like, "Are you Danny Miro from LinkedIn?" And so it's like, I feel like a mini celebrity at the moment, right? And I don't see myself as that, right? Or, a creator, or anything like this. I'm just trying to build my business. And I know that visibility is a big part of that. And so while I have a newsletter, I had my Instagram, I have my TikTok, I was trying repost these reels also on YouTube. The best place, and now where I dedicate probably 90% of my time when it comes to content, is LinkedIn.
But it is fair to say or to share that the content on LinkedIn, let's say whether it's your reel or your post or your photos, they're different from something you will
Of
post
course.
on TikTok or IG or Facebook.
Yep, yep. So it's definitely different. However, I would even say it's starting to change, right?
Really?
Yeah, especially even I would say, you know, I hate to say like my generation, or whatever, but even younger than me, right? uh, like, even those folks that are younger than me now, right? And now that I'm getting a little older and wiser, young folks really are starting to treat the platform even more differently, right? And so that's even starting to accelerate the change on the platform, where you know used to be seen as this very strictly professional platform and almost like a digital resume, right? Another place to have like this digital resume. But now, I argue it is becoming a social network, and there's some people that post on it like it was Twitter or it
You know,
was
I
Instagram.
have to say the other day I posted a reel. It was called February Diaries, and
Right.
February's Diaries loading, and I asked myself, I said, should I post this on LinkedIn? I don't know, not sure. And then at the end of it, it was like 6 o'clock. I said, you know what? Send. I was like, post. It's interestingly, there were a lot of views on it, but I wasn't. It's that sort of middle line between, is this professional
Mm,
enough? But I was truly being myself, not in a,
mm,
crazy way. I was just being myself like I am on the podcast. So I said, "Hey,
mm.
why not? What's the worst that
Yeah,
can happen?"
exactly. Right. That's my perspective. And I think, again, it's a shift we're starting to see. And so, again, yeah, there's a place for all types of content, and maybe there's some stuff you wouldn't put on LinkedIn. However, I would
Like
say,
your
like,
dancing videos.
perhaps, right? But hey, if you're dancing and you're teaching something about Excel, I don't know, right? You could post that too. Well, you never know
Okay,
what's in it. Or
that's a good point.
I'll give you one example, right? Like this. Um, I saw recently this guy who's a photographer. Most of his business was built off of, Instagram, right? I don't know that much about the guy, right? But started deciding to post a little bit more on LinkedIn, had a few posts kind of blow up. His business completely transformed, right? just because he started posting some clean pictures of the work that he was doing, right? On Instagram onto the platform, lots of visibility, it led to clients, right? Same thing with me. Sometimes I post on there. And I'll give you an example recently. It was we had the Super Bowl we were talking about earlier. Obviously a big Latino moment. I'm constantly, because I'm in the Latino space, I'm looking and I'm observing. I saw this post literally on my Instagram, right? And it was a collaboration between Young Miko, Puerto Rican rap artist, and Drewski, who's this really big African American creator. And it was in partnership with Don Julio Tequila, obviously a massive brand. And I thought it was, really well done and really good perspective. So I took, two screenshots. I went on LinkedIn. I basically said, hey, this is why I think, this worked, and I would love to see more brands doing this type of work. It kind of gave my take on the ad, right? Next thing the head of marketing at Diageo, which is kind of the parent company for Don Julio, people specifically on the Don Julio brand, liking, engaging, commenting, sharing my posts. That's the type of thing that it's not as visible, right? To see that on these other platforms. And it's one of the reasons that I think, LinkedIn has so much potential, because you can really share a lot of your interests and connect with the right people. So I just encourage people, hey, if you're creating on other platforms, give it a try, right? Because it might lead
Wow.
to some pretty cool stuff.
Well, you heard it here first. LinkedIn is the place to be. Danny, thank you so much. I know I kept you more than I promised, but you are just a wealth of just information. So thank you for being here. Can you please share your socials? I'm sure people want to reach out to you.
Yeah, for sure. So I was just mentioning LinkedIn. So if you look up Danny Miro-Chinea, you can find me there, but also Danny Miro-C on all of the other platforms. So feel free to reach out, DANNYMIROC, and happy to connect and share.
Thank you so much for being here today. The creator economy isn't just about content, it's about ownership, leverage, and long term value. If you're building something right now, remember this: community and compensation are not opposites. You can grow with integrity and charge your worth. Good luck, loves. Keep that content coming. And thank you for being here today. Talk to you soon. Bye.